what congressional gridlock looks like in one picture. Look at this chart. You see that tiny little bar at the very end? Well, that represents congressional futility. The 150 laws passed by the 118th Congress, the fewest passed in a session in decades. How many of those do you wager are post office renamings and the like?
70 to 80%.
Still too many for me, Abby.
I don't too many for all of us.
I don't judge. No, I'm saying that's too many
too
bills.
Many bills
I don't judge the productivity of a Congress based on the volume of bills passed. I judge it based on how few they pass. But it's what they do that matters. And I guess some of the stuff was they had to do. Some of it was post office renamings. I'm more excited about the future than I am the past, though, because Republicans will actually have a chance to execute.
I don't want to get hung up on the number, but I do think that Congress has work to do. They have important work to do for real people's lives, and it's the stuff that we don't talk about that they failed to do that I think makes the biggest impact. This Congress is now going to be going into a new session where Republicans are going to control both houses. But in the House, they don't have the Trump mandate that maybe Trump got from winning the popular vote and winning the Electoral College by a huge margin. So how are they going to govern? Are they going to be able to govern?
I think Republicans are going to be in a dead gridlock right now. The margin is so small for Johnson with those votes. And the hardliners have already said, with the debt ceiling, anything like that, that they're not willing to move on that. So I don't think that it's going to be a productive time for them. I think that the narrative is going to be driven by President-elect Trump. And that will be a huge indicator of how things are going to go.
You use the phrase, what we don't talk about. So let me tell you a story that happened to me over Christmas. I was home in Louisville, North Carolina, just outside of Winston-Salem, with two friends from high school. Smart guys, both college graduates. What we would call, it's a phrase I otherwise don't like, high information voters. And my friend Paul, I'll use his name, Paul, had a lot of opinions about the 6 or 10 members of Congress that we always talk about. But why aren't we getting things done? And I said, well, what do you think about Patrick McHenry? And he said, who's that? Now, Patrick McHenry not only was the financial services chair, worked very well in a bipartisan way with Democrat Maxine Waters, obviously far to the left Maxine Waters is. Also, at one point, Patrick McHenry represented that town of Louisville in Congress. And he didn't know who Patrick McHenry was, but knew who Matt Gaetz was. He had definite thoughts about AOC and Nancy Mace, and we can go on down the line. That is a failure of our political incentive structure. That is a failure of our media. That is of local media, national media. If you live in a district and you don't know who your member of Congress is because they're not one of the loudmouths, how are we supposed to get things done?
It may also be a product of the margins that, a Speaker Johnson, if there is a Speaker Johnson, will have. I mean, he has this vote coming up for a speakership. Trump has now endorsed him, so things are looking up. But he can only lose 2 votes. There are so far, by our count, at least 4 hard holdouts so far. And if you're Speaker Johnson, right, those 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, everybody's going to know their names because they're going to wield basically all of the power on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, the question is, do they care more about the American people and getting stuff done for the American people, or do they care more about keeping their seats? Now, if they care more about keeping their seats, they'll get in line when Trump says, I need you to do this, and they'll do it. If they care about the American people, though, they will look to work across the aisle. They'll look to actually get stuff done. They'll look to do more than investigate and argue and search for porn on the floor, whatever it is that other folks were doing there. But I think
Johnson.
Not Speaker Johnson.
Because he has that app on his
phone.
phone.
Well, maybe Matt Gaetz. But the bottom line is, do you care more about the people or do you care more about the seat? That's what it's going to come down to.
Speaker Johnson was on Fox tonight. He was thanking Trump for his endorsement, but he had this message to his conference.
He recognizes that what we need right now, I think my colleagues recognize this as well, is a proven fighter and a true MAGA conservative, but also someone who can work with every single member of our very diverse House GOP so that we can get President Trump's priorities over the line.
Do you think they have it in them, Scott Jennings? I mean, you've been here for a lot of these fights. Yeah. We've talked about them. Some of these members, men and women, they don't want to support anything at all.
Yeah, the message for Johnson that's going to work best is teamwork. And it's the message that's coming out of Donald Trump. He supports Johnson because he trusts Johnson and thinks Johnson's going to support his agenda. But more than anything, a path to nowhere here is to just fight amongst yourselves. And when you have a divided conference like this and you have a closely divided chamber, there is only one way to get things done for the American people, and that's for all the Republicans to stick together. And we saw some division on this at the end of the year, and the Democrats were able to stick together for the most part. Republicans have to learn to stop fighting with each other and listen to their coach in this case, and their coach is Donald Trump, and he obviously wants to hit the ground running. I know Johnson wants to pass legislation between January 3rd, January 20th, so Trump can begin to sign things into law. None of this happens if you have a protracted leadership fight. So the best reason to elect Johnson, he's smart, he's done a good job under difficult circumstances, and more than anything, teamwork here helps Trump, and that's what Republican voters asked for in
Scott's
November.
exactly right, but I go back to 2011. You're exactly right. Early 2011, we just had the Tea Party wave come into Congress, and at a House Republican conference meeting, Raul Labrador, then a freshman from Idaho, stands up and says, "I didn't come here to be a part of any team." Well, good luck getting anything done then. And there are enough members in the House conference who don't want to be a part of any team. They've shown that, or they'll be their little clique of misbehaviors, and that's how they get their influence. That's how they raise money. That's how they get media attention.
And that's how they become famous.
And that's how they become
in
exactly.
Louisville. Look, what's the over/under on how many Kevin McCarthy's that Speaker Johnson's going to have to go through in January in the Speaker vote?
I don't know, but I think it's going to be really interesting if you look at the Senate and what happened with the Secretary of Defense, Department of Defense nomination process, and how Senator Ernst was expressing her concerns about that nominee and how she was quickly welded into submission. I'm curious to see if that'll happen over on the House side.
On the House side, I mean, there's much less cooperation than on the Senate side. Yeah. And I think that when you're talking about a 2-vote margin, it almost feels inevitable that this is not going to be a one ballot and done kind of situation.
There's going to be a Joe Manchin that's going to jump out on the Republican side and is going to get all the
a moderate meaning, or
no, somebody
just a
who's going to be against whatever the president is trying to do in order to get attention for himself. Somebody who is, willing to do whatever they need to do in order to be the center of attention. In order
your
to be the
definition
person
of a Joe
everybody's
Manchin
looking
is
at.
different from some.
Well, that's my definition, because Joe Manchin killed Democratic legislation by being the guy on the other side.
Remember, there's no House of Representatives until we have a speaker. And when that vote goes on, the first thing we looked at in John Boehner's reelection campaign for speaker in 2013 were, who were the no-shows? And we got to Bachmann. No Bachmann. We got to Blackburn, no Blackburn. So you're going to have members who are going to be back in their offices watching and waiting to see, and then they'll very courageously make their decisions.
So here are the words of Congressman Jason Crow, a Democrat. We're not going to take an all-or-nothing mentality, because we know that when people take an all-or-nothing mentality, Americans end up with nothing. That's just not acceptable to us. He's probably right about that, right?
It will not be acceptable to Republicans broadly if the Republican Party that they sent to Washington spends all of its time fighting with each other and not worrying about how to enact the Trump agenda. I think a lot of these members sort of get it in their mind that their voters are looking for them to put their interests, meaning the members' interest, above Trump. They voted for Trump. They want what Trump is selling. If they don't get to what Trump is selling, there will be anger about that, and Trump knows that. And his putting his shoulder behind Johnson tonight, to me, is the first step in making this go more quickly than not.
Where things go haywire is when some of these members think they know Trump better than Trump, and they start to say to him, well, you're being influenced by all the wrong people. That's when we start to see trouble with the Republican conference.
And there's your debt limit conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they
exactly.
voted for Trump.
We literally just saw that happen.